A reading from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 23, verses 32 to 43. Two others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And may God speak to us through these verses today. Way back in 1925, a man with the somewhat unusual name of Bernard Coffindaffer was born in a small West Virginia town. And after serving in the Marines in World War II, he became a wealthy businessman in the coal and oil industries. He started a family. One day, he had a religious experience and was, as we say, born again. His focus shifted from making money to spreading the gospel. He preached in 7 different churches in his area. Now, his health declined, and after a couple of heart bypass surgeries, Coffindaffer was inspired by what he called a vision to start installing 3 wooden crosses along major highways throughout the country. It began in 1984, and he eventually planted over 2,000 of those cross clusters here in the United States, but also in Zambia and the Philippines. Coffindaffer died in 1993. But an organization was formed to continue his work. And this is the story of why you see those 3 crosses along the highway almost everywhere you go. Now, it's important that Coffindaffer's vision was of 3 crosses and not just one. It is a helpful reminder that Jesus was not crucified alone. He was not the first or the last or the only to suffer that fate. The Romans did not invent crucifixion, but they did adopt it as a form of public execution because it was so cruel and humiliating. History records that the hillsides along roads in and out of Jerusalem and other parts of Israel had little forests of crosses so everyone could see them as a kind of warning. You cause trouble for Rome, that's what you get. Jesus caused trouble. But the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, didn't seem to think he was all that bad. He kept trying to let Jesus off the hook. But the Jewish religious leaders had had enough of Jesus. They considered him too much of a troublemaker. They wanted him not only gone, but dead. The problem was, under Roman law, only Romans could put someone to death. So they had to sort of bully and manipulate Pilate to do their dirty work for them. And the problem was, if Pilate could not control this situation that he was governor of, what if a riot or some sort of violence broke out? Well, he'd be in trouble with his superiors. So to keep the peace and his job, Pilate wound up letting Jesus be crucified. Although he did manage to get a little bit of sarcastic revenge on that Jewish crowd because they made him do this by having a sign posted above Jesus' head that said, "The King of the Jews." Now, 2 other troublemakers are crucified with Jesus, 2 criminals. Luke is the only gospel that records a conversation between these three. And it starts with one of the criminals taunting and ridiculing Jesus, just like the crowd. Oh, look who we have here, the Messiah. Some Messiah. You're supposed to be this great Messiah. Why don't you do something to save us? Which, in some ways, was a reasonable question. After all, what kind of Messiah wound up dying on a cross? But the other criminal defends Jesus. How dare you talk like that? Aren't you afraid of God's judgment? Besides, we deserve what we're getting. We are guilty. But he's innocent. He hasn't done anything to deserve this. And then he asks Jesus to remember him in the kingdom to come, and Jesus promises that he will. Now, today is the day on the church calendar that is designated Christ the King Sunday, which highlights the dominion, the reign of Christ in our lives. And it may seem that these verses about the crucifixion between two criminals doesn't have a whole lot to do with that. Now, Luke does not give names for these two criminals, but there is an apocryphal story that their names are Dismas and Justus. Justus is the bitter, angry criminal who attacks Jesus, and Dismas is the remorseful criminal who defends Jesus. And actually, their cross-conversation is very important to our understanding of Christ as King. You know, when we think of kings and kingdoms, we think in terms of grandeur and power. That's how the criminal Justus seems to think of it too. He seems to want Jesus to do something amazing and spectacular and dramatic. Summon an angel army, command the power of God. Never mind that Justus is guilty. He wants Jesus to do something to save them from this terrible fate. Otherwise, what good is this so-called Messiah, this King of the Jews? There's a bit of an echo here of the temptations that Jesus faced in the wilderness when the devil tried to persuade him to take the path of power and glory rather than humility and service. Or when Peter swore he would not let such a terrible thing happen to Jesus, only for Jesus to reply, "Get behind me, Satan." The temptation to this image of Christ the King is strong among Christians today too. But always we must remember that the symbol of our faith is not a golden throne, but a wooden cross. Jesus' kingdom is not built on power or commands or might. It is built out of love and forgiveness and humble service. The other criminal, Dismas, seems to have a grasp of that in some way. He does not beg for rescue. He begs for forgiveness. Never mind that he too is guilty. He does not deny it. But he hopes Jesus will accept him into his kingdom. Perhaps he understands that Jesus' kingdom is one more of spirit, not of armies or magic fixes. And when Jesus promises him paradise, well, that's what we call grace. Now, we also see in these two criminals two different types of people, or maybe even two different approaches to life. Justice is a symbol of all those who refuse to acknowledge their guilt or take responsibility for their actions. He has surely hurt or taken advantage of many people. And it would seem that so far he's gotten away with it. He's never really had to face the consequences of his actions. And even now, as he faces death, he has this selfish need to pretend he doesn't deserve this punishment for his crimes. A selfish need to more or less get away with something. Justice wants to be saved from the cross, even if it means using the Messiah to accomplish it. He doesn't care about what he should do for the Messiah. He only cares about what the Messiah can do for him. Dismas, on the other hand, has come to a point of remorse. He acknowledges his guilt and he takes responsibility for his crimes. And maybe he's always felt that way. Maybe he has always wished that he could be a better person, but he felt trapped by his circumstances or trapped by his own weakness into a life of crime. Or maybe it just took this death sentence to bring him to this realization. Either way, he does not expect mercy in this life, but he hopes for and he asks for mercy in the next. Dismas wants to be saved not from the cross, but from himself. Dismas has been humbled and brought to repentance while Justus has not. And maybe that's why Dismas's prayer and not Justus's prayer gets answered. Now again, this raises the question on Christ the King Sunday. What kind of king, what kind of Christ, what kind of Jesus are we following and worshiping? Is it the real Jesus or one we only want him to be? One writer says that Luke reports no more talk between these prisoners, and yet wherever the symbol of the three crosses survive, their conversation continues. Justus and Dismas both have their say, while Jesus bridges the distance between them, the bitter man and the hopeful one, the lost one and the found. There may be only one cross here today, but God knows that we are all hanging on the other two. Whenever we stand near his, we complete the tableau. One cross makes a crucifix. 3 crosses make a church. Amen.